The Carolina Panthers just turned what everyone thought was a lost cause into a warning for the whole NFC, and almost nobody is ready for what that really means. This is the same franchise people laughed off after a 5-win season. The same defense that gave up 534 points and was called the worst in league history, suddenly standing in their own stadium, hosting a playoff game and going toe-to-toe with a 12-win Los Angeles Rams team. That is not a cute underdog story. That is a team changing its future in real time. One year it looked like a complete reset. The next year, they walked out with the division crown, a playoff atmosphere that felt like old Carolina, and a message to the rest of the conference that they are no longer the easy week on your schedule. Something real shifted in Charlotte, and it did not happen by accident. You can feel it when you look at every level of this roster. On offense, they finally stopped treating Bryce Young like a test subject and started treating him like a franchise investment, building a real wall inside with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, then dropping a mismatch weapon in Tedairoa McMillan on the outside to give him a target defenses actually fear. The run game stopped being a side note and turned into a real engine with Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle carrying the load, so Bryce Young did not have to throw 40 times just to survive. On defense, the group that once looked helpless suddenly started winning games in the low 20s, leaning on a healthy Derrick Brown in the middle, and a secondary where players like Mike Jackson stopped being depth pieces and started playing like #1 corners. This was not some lucky bounce season where everything fluked their way. They started 1-3, they took hits. They still fought back into the playoff picture and nearly ripped an upset from a Super Bowl-level Rams team. Now the scary part for everyone else is this simple question. If the Carolina Panthers could do all of that while still finishing with a losing record, what happens if they actually hit the next level? The defense already climbed from disaster to average, and one more good offseason could push it into the top group in the conference. The front office has real choices to make at linebacker, at corner, at safety, where in every decision will either protect what they built or crack it wide open. But none of it matters if the quarterback is not real. The entire story shifts on whether Bryce Young was just a nice comeback act for one season or the start of a steady, cold-blooded franchise leader who lives in the biggest moments. To understand how dangerous this team can really become, you have to rewind and look at how Bryce Young dragged his own name out of the bus pile and changed the way people talk about him. But before we get into that, hit that like and subscribe button for more Panthers and all the NFL content. Can we get 200 likes on this video? Nobody was supposed to be talking about Bryce Young like this right now. A year ago, people were already whispering that the #1 pick might be a mistake, that Carolina would have to start thinking about the next guy before this era even began. He got benched early in that ugly season. The offense looked confused. The whole experiment felt like it was slipping away before it even had a chance to grow. Fast forward, and suddenly that same quarterback is walking into huddles in the fourth quarter with the game on the line. Calm voice, steady eyes, and an entire sideline looking at him like he is the answer instead of the question. That switch did not flip by accident. It came from weeks of getting hit, questioned, doubted, then stepping right back under center and refusing to disappear. Look at what actually happened when the dust settled on his year. On paper, you can call it 3,100 plus passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, completion around the low 60s, a passer rating in the high 80s. Those numbers will not break any record board, and that is exactly why people who only read box scores will miss the real story. The important part is when those throws landed. Bryce Young dragged Carolina through tight games with 5 fourth-quarter comebacks and 5 game-winning drives, and the team went 7-3 in one-score finishes because he kept making the right choice when everything shrunk and the field felt tiny. He stopped forcing the hero ball and started taking the smart throw, trusting his protection, trusting his receivers, taking free yards with his legs when defenses forgot he could move, then dropping a strike when they finally stepped up. In the wild card fight with the Rams, he threw for more than 260 yards, added a rushing touchdown, and kept trading blows with a proven contender until the very last minutes. For a player who was once treated like a problem to fix, that is a huge shift in who he is in big moments. Now the whole league has to ask a different kind of question about Bryce Young. Was this just a nice comeback season, or is this the baseline for what he is going to be every year when the games get tight and the lights get heavy? If this is only his starting point, then Carolina just found the steady heartbeat you need if you want to stay in the playoff picture for a long time. Not just pop up once and vanish. But even a clutch quarterback cannot do it alone. His growth only turned into wins because something just as dramatic was happening on the other side of the ball, where a defense that used to get torched every week suddenly started dragging teams into tough, low-scoring fights. To really understand how dangerous this Panthers team can become, you have to see how that defense went from a punchline to a problem in only one season. The crazy part about this Panthers story is how fast the defense stopped being a meme and started being the reason other teams got tight in the fourth quarter. One year, you saw scoreboard after scoreboard with Carolina on the wrong end, giving up 31.4 points per game, getting gashed on the ground, and hearing people say this might be one of the worst groups the league has ever seen. Then you blink, and the very next season, that same defense is standing across from a 12-win Los Angeles Rams team, trading stops, forcing long drives, and keeping a playoff game alive right down to the final possession. That is not a small adjustment. That is an identity flip. The biggest surprise is that it did not come from one miracle superstar. It came from a complete shift in how they built the front and how they decided they were going to win games. Everything changed when Carolina finally got their backbone back in the middle. Derrick Brown returned healthy and reminded everyone why he had graded as one of the best run defenders in football before his injury, locking down inside gaps so backs stopped walking into open lanes. Around him, they stacked tough rotational pieces like Turk Wharton, Bobby Brown, and Pat Jones, not as headlines, but as real snaps that kept the standard high for 4 full quarters. The numbers tell you how different it felt. That defense dropped from giving up more than 530 points to sitting in the middle of the league at about 22.4 points per game. And the rushing yardage that used to embarrass them suddenly turned into hard-earned carries. Games that used to spiral into track meets turned into long, frustrating nights for opposing offenses, where every first down felt painful and every red zone trip felt like a fight. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were dictating how games would be played. Once that mentality took hold, you could see it in the way they closed out wins. Scores like 23-20, 13-6, 30-27 started to define their season, not as lucky escapes, but as proof that this defense could drag teams into low scoring, physical battles, and then finish the final few drives. Players like Mike Jackson stepped up with plays that flipped entire afternoons, including that famous interception return against Matthew Stafford in the regular season matchup that made people sit up and really notice what Carolina was building. They went from a group people circled as a target to a unit that quietly ruined a lot of game plans. And the best way to see how real that shift was is to walk back through the exact games where everything turned, from the early collapse in September to the comeback against Miami to that wild 3-team NFC South race that ended with the Panthers holding the division title. The season did not start with magic. It started with a punch in the mouth. Week 1 in Jacksonville, Bryce Young walks into a loud road stadium. Chake turns the ball over 3 times, and Carolina walks out with a 26-10 loss that feels like a bad rerun. Week 2 in Arizona somehow looks even worse, with giveaways on the first 2 drives and the scoreboard sliding away before the Panthers even settle in. At 0 wins and 2 losses, it is easy to believe nothing has changed, and the noise around Bryce Young and this roster starts building again. Then week 3 hits, the home opener against Atlanta, and everything flips in one afternoon. Carolina shuts out the Falcons 30-0, their first shutout since the early part of the decade, wins the turnover battle with ease, and the same defense that everyone doubted walks off the field to a stadium that suddenly feels alive again. That is the first time the story cracks. The old version of this team does not throw a complete shutout with the whole league watching to see if they will collapse. The roller coaster does not stop there. The next week, against New England, they control time of possession, pile up more yards, avoid turnovers, and still get blown off the field, 42-13. A reminder that nothing about this climb is smooth. The record drops to 1 win and 3 losses, and the talk about a slow rebuild comes roaring back. Then Miami comes to town, and that is where the season bends for good. Carolina falls behind 17-0 late in the second quarter against one of the most explosive offenses in football, and it feels over, but instead of folding, they lean into the run game. Let Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle hammer away. They give Bryce Young chance after chance to work them back into it, and they storm all the way back to steal a 27-24 win. That comeback ties a franchise record for the largest deficit erased and moves their all-time record in games where they trail by 17 or more to 4 wins and 117 losses, including playoffs. For the first time in years, this team strings together a real winning streak. 3 straight victories, and by week 7, Carolina is sitting at 4 wins and 3 losses, above 500 and feeling like a serious problem instead of a rebuilding project. The finish to the year turns the division itself into a circus. That late season trip to Los Angeles against a 12-win Rams team becomes one of the shocks of the schedule. With Tyrone McMillan taking the top off the defense for a long fourth quarter touchdown. Mike Jackson jumping a Matthew Stafford throw, and Carolina walking out of the building with a narrow win no one saw coming. By week 18, the entire NFC South is jammed together with the Panthers, Tampa Bay, and Atlanta, all sitting at 8 wins and 9 losses, after Carolina drops a tight game 16-14 against the Buccaneers. It comes down to head-to-head records. The Panthers win the tiebreaker, and suddenly that same team, people buried in September, is hosting a playoff game with the worst point differential of any team in the bracket. They push the Rams to 34-31 in a wild card thriller and prove they are not just happy to be there. But underneath all the drama, one truth keeps popping up on tape. The front finally looks solid. The secondary makes big plays, yet the middle of the defense still bends more than it should. If Carolina wants this kind of chaos to turn into consistent January football, the next chapter has to be about rebuilding the heart of the defense at linebacker and finally bringing that position back to the standard this franchise was built on. For a long time, the identity of Carolina football lived in the middle of the field, with players like Luke Kuechly, Thomas Davis, and Shaq Thompson cleaning everything up. That position used to set the tone for the whole team. Now the strange part of this turnaround is that the front looks stronger, the secondary is making big plays, and the soft spot is the one area that used to be automatic for this franchise. Too many tight ends running free on third down. Too many backs slipping into open space after the line does its job. You can feel it on film. The Panthers are one smart offseason away from having a complete defense, but if they miss at linebacker again, the whole thing can stall right where it stands. When you look at the room right now, it is full of effort and questions. Trevin Wallace has the range and burst you want, but 2 straight years with shoulder problems and missed games raise real doubts about how much you can lean on him over a full season. Christian Roseboom stepped in, played almost every week, made more than 120 tackles, and became a respected voice in that locker room. But his coverage struggles showed up over and over when athletic tight ends isolated him in space. The good news is, the fix is clear. It just takes courage from Dan Morgan, Brant Tylis, Dave Canales, and Ejiro Evero to finally pay the price. In free agency, a player like Devin Lloyd can walk in and change everything overnight. With an 89.1 defensive grade in Jacksonville, top-tier run defense, and an 81.1 coverage mark that is exactly what Carolina has been missing in the middle. In the draft, instead of waiting until late again, using a pick like 19 on a true centerpiece from names such as Sonny Styles, Anthony Hill, C.J. Allen, Jake Golday, or Josiah Trotter would send a message that linebacker is back on the priority list, not an afterthought. You put a real star next to Trevon Wallace, let Christian Roseboom and Claudin Sherlis slide into pure depth roles, and suddenly the spine of the defense matches the talent up front. Once that heart is rebuilt, the spotlight naturally moves to the outside, where another huge decision is waiting, because one corner in Carolina has quietly played like a top player at his position while being paid like a role guy, and the front office cannot dodge that choice much longer. There's a strange tension sitting right on the edges of this defense. On one side, you have J.C. Horn, the former top 10 pick, with a fresh monster deal that pays him like one of the best corners in football. On the other side, you have Mike Jackson, a player Carolina traded for quietly, who has lined up every single week, taken the toughest assignments, and for 2 straight seasons has played like a top-tier starter while making a fraction of star money. Fans see it, teammates feel it, the tape screams it. That one corner is already locked in on a long multi-year contract worth around $100 million. The other is walking into the final year of a 2-year, $10.5 million agreement that looks more like a bargain stop than a reward for high-level play. That kind of gap does not stay in the background forever. At some point, the front office has to decide what message they want to send to the locker room about how this team values performance and stability. The crazy part is how much Mike Jackson has done to force that conversation. Since landing in Carolina, he has started every game, played close to 99% of the defensive snaps, and graded in the top 3 among all corners last season in overall coverage, according to the advanced numbers. He has taken on big-time receivers, jumped routes in key moments, and turned games with plays like that pick 6 against Matthew Stafford in the first Rams matchup that flipped the whole afternoon. Across from him, J.C. Horn finally put together a season where he stayed on the field, earned Pro Bowl respect, and reminded everybody why the team trusted him with that huge contract. Behind those two, younger players like Chow Smith-Wade and Corey Thornton have flashed toughness and competitive fire in the slot and depth roles, while veterans such as Dane Jackson and Damari Mathis represent the kind of experienced competition the team can lean on when injuries hit. All of that adds up to something Carolina has not enjoyed in a long time at this position, a real combination of star power and layers. But that balance only lasts if the financial side matches what the film is saying. So the decision staring at Dan Morgan and Brant Tylis is bigger than one contract line. Do they let Mike Jackson play out this year on discount money and risk losing him just as this defense is starting to gel? Or do they step in now, tear up the old deal, and pay him closer to what a true number 1 corner earns, while using creative structure to keep the cap healthy? If they get it right, they roll into the next few seasons with J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson locked in as one of the strongest duos in the conference, a steady veteran behind them, and young corners fighting for snaps instead of being thrown into chaos. If they hesitate, one soft spot appears where they can least afford it, right when the rest of the roster is starting to look ready. And even if corner is solved perfectly, there is still one more layer behind them that can make or break this entire project. Because the next big question is whether Carolina truly trusts Lathan Ransom and Trevon Moehrig to own the safety spots, or feels the need to bring in another heavy hitter on the back end. The last open question sits in the deep part of this defense, where Trevon Moehrig is already paid like a true starter, and Lathan Ransom is trying to prove he is ready for a full-time role, or needs one more year next to a veteran upgrade. Whatever Carolina decides, they will help set the ceiling for a roster that already has a real core in Bryce Young, Derek Brown, Mike Jackson, and J.C. Horn. The hard part is mostly done. The team found its quarterback, its anchor up front, and its outside coverage. It all while winning only 8 games and still pushing a strong Rams team to the limit. Now the job for Dan Morgan, Brant Tylis, Dave Canales, and Ejiro Evero is simple on paper, but demanding in reality. They must fix the last weak spots instead of chasing shiny new problems. Strengthen the middle, make the right call at safety, reward the players who have already carried this turnaround, and the expectation becomes double-digit wins and home playoff football, not sneaking in on a tiebreaker. If they stay aggressive and trust this plan, the Panthers stop being a nice surprise and start becoming one of those NFC teams other contenders quietly hope to avoid in January.